financial obligations for our people and for our nation. We're able to meet these obligations based on the revenue we receive from taxes and based on our ability to borrow when needed. And in that case, we're able to borrow because we always pay our debt. We always paid what we owe. We've never failed. That's America. That's who we are. That's what's called for. It's called full faith and credit of the United States. It's rock solid. It's the best in the world. But here's the deal. There's a cap on what we can borrow called the debt limit. And only Congress can raise or lower that debt limit. So let me be really clear. This is really important to know. Raising the debt limit is about paying off our old debts. It has nothing to do with any new spending being considered. It has nothing to do with my plan for infrastructure or building back better. Zero. Both of which I might add are paid for. So if we're going to make good on what's already been approved by previous Congresses and previous presidents and parties, we have to pay for it. Social Security benefits, the American people are promised, salaries for servicemen and women, benefits for veterans. We're going to have to raise the debt limit if we're going to meet those obligations. And raising the debt limit is usually a bipartisan undertaking, and it should be. That's what is not happening today. The reason we have to raise the debt limit is in part because of the reckless tax and spending policies under the previous Trump administration. In 4 years, they incurred nearly $8 trillion. In 4 years, $8 trillion in additional debt. In bills we have to now pay off. That's more than a quarter of the entire debt incurred now outstanding after more than 200 years. And Republicans in Congress raised the debt 3 times when Donald Trump was president, and each time with Democrat support. But now they won't raise it, even though they're responsible for more than $8 trillion in bills incurred in 4 years under the previous administration. That's what we'd be paying off. They won't raise it even though defaulting on the debt would lead to a self-inflicted wound that takes our economy over a cliff and risks jobs and retirement savings, Social Security benefits, salaries for service members, benefits for veterans, and so much more. A failure to raise the debt limit will call into question Congress's willingness to meet our obligations that we've already incurred, not new ones, we've already incurred. This is going to undermine the safety of U.S. Treasury securities, and it will threaten the reserve status of the dollar as the world's currency that the world relies on. American credit rating will be downgraded. Interest rates will rise for mortgages, auto loans, credit cards, borrowing. Folks, watching at home, you should know this is the Republican position. Here's it is. They won't vote to raise the debt limit to cover their own spending. Democrats voted with them to cover that spending the previous 4 years. They say Democrats should do it alone. But then they're threatening to use a procedural power called the filibuster, meaning that we'd have to get 60 votes, not 50 votes, to increase the debt limit. This would block the Democrats from meeting our obligations and responsibilities to prevent Congress from raising the debt limit. So let's be clear. Not only are Republicans refusing to do their job, they're threatening to use their power, to prevent us from doing our job, saving the economy from a catastrophic event. I think, quite frankly, it's hypocritical, dangerous, and disgraceful. Their obstruction and irresponsibility knows absolutely no bounds, especially as we're clawing our way out of this pandemic. Democrats will meet our responsibility and obligation to this country. We're not expecting Republicans to do their part. They made it clear from the beginning. We tried asking to no avail. We're just asking them not to use procedural tricks to block us from doing the job that they won't do. Meteor is headed to crash into our economy. Democrats are willing to do all the work stopping it. Republicans just have to let us do our job. Just get out of the way. If you don't want to help save the country, get out of the way so you don't destroy it. We don't have time to delay with elaborate procedural schemes, which Republicans' proposals require. Scores of votes without any certainty at all, many of which have nothing to do with the debt limit at all. And that's when accidents happen. In the days ahead, even before the default date, people may see the value of their retirement accounts shrink. They may see interest rates go up, which will ultimately raise their mortgage payments and car payments. And the American people, look, I just say it this way. As soon as this week, your savings in your pocketbook could be directly impacted by this Republican stunt. It's as simple as that. Republicans say they will not do their part to avoid this needless calamity. So be it. But they need to stop playing Russian roulette with the U.S. economy. It's one thing to pay our debts already acquired. It's another to require a supermajority to pay the debts already acquired. It's not right. Let the Democrats vote to raise the debt ceiling this week without obstruction or further delays. Democrats in the House have already passed a bill that would do that. It's sitting in the United States Senate where Democrats have the votes ready to pass it. That's the only way to eliminate the uncertainty and risk that's going to harm American families and our economy. Let us vote and end the mess. You know, we've got to get this done. We must get this done. It is, like, as I said, playing Russian roulette to play these games. We can do it this week. Just get out of the way and let us pass it. Thank you.
Mr. President, Senator Mitch McConnell says he has sent a letter to you explaining his view. Have you seen that letter? Have you communicated with him? And how dire do you believe this is if action doesn't take place in the next few days?
First of all, I did get a letter. I got it 10 minutes before I walked in here. I've read it. I plan on talking to Mitch about it. He and I have been down this road once before, back when I was vice president. And I hope we can have some intelligent and honest conversation about what he's proposing. And I think the easiest way to do this, and if the Republicans would not use the filibuster, would be to let us vote on what is already in the Senate right now, passed by the House, to raise the debt limit. And we could do that in the next several days.
Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. President. You've often touted your experience in the Senate, your 36 years in the Senate. Your aides have talked about your abilities to be a closer on deals involving legislation. Why were you unable, Mr. President, to close the deal with members of your own party on key parts of your legislative agenda last week? Thank you.
I've been able to close the deal on 99% of my party. Two people. That's still underway. I don't think there's been a president who's been able to close deals that's been in a position where he has only 50 votes in the Senate and a bare majority in the House. This is a process. We'll get it done.
It sounds like you're putting the blame squarely on two U.S. senators for your inability to close that deal, Senator Sinema and Senator Manchin. Am I incorrect? Is that who the blame lies with?
Look, I need 50 votes in the Senate. I have 48.
Leader Schumer has vowed not to raise the debt ceiling through the reconciliation process. So ultimately, if push comes to shove, Leader Schumer has said he won't raise the debt ceiling through the reconciliation process. So ultimately, if push comes to shove and Senator McConnell does not change his position, what is more important, that position that Senator Schumer has or raising the debt ceiling? And then I also have a question for you on Ethiopia.
No, I'm going to answer one. I'm not going to answer Ethiopia. Let's stick on the debt so we don't confuse the American people. Number one, the issue of reconciliation, which is like code to the American people. What's reconciliation? There is a process that I understand the Republican leader is willing to initiate, go through, that would require literally up to hundreds of votes. It's unlimited number of votes having nothing directly to do with the debt limit. Could be for everything from Ethiopia to anything else that has nothing to do with the debt limit. And it's fraught with all kinds of potential danger for miscalculation. And it would have to happen twice. So you could literally have several hundred votes over the next number of days. Everything else would come to a standstill, but you still find yourself in a situation where at the end of the day, we may have passed something that in fact then has to be undone again by either Democrats or Republicans. It's an incredibly complicated, cumbersome process when there's a very simple process sitting out there. Sitting at the desk in the United States Senate is a bill passed by the House saying, we Democrats will raise the debt limit, take responsibility for raising, even though we didn't, some voted to acquire the debt as well. We will go ahead and do that. That's the way to proceed.
If it comes down to reconciliation or raising the debt ceiling, which position would you take?
I'm not going to cross that bridge till we have to get there.
President, address the allegations of genocide and why you haven't yet imposed those sanctions that you authorized 2 weeks ago, sir?
Speak to that later.
Regarding your Build Back Better agenda, we know the top line figure from Senator Manchin is $1.5 trillion. Senator Kirsten Sinema has yet to really give that number of where she's willing to go, how high she's willing to go, but she says she's negotiating good faith with the White House. What is her figure?
I'll let her tell you that. I don't want it. We're in negotiations.
Between 1.5 and 3.5? Is it higher at least than the 1.5?
I'm not going to negotiate in public.
Mr. President, Mr. President.
Mr. President, how is what the Republicans are doing now any different from when you opposed raising the debt limit as a senator during the Bush years?
Because we weren't calling for filibuster. We did not require 60 votes, and it was a straight up and down vote.
Mr. President, Mr. President, you're talking about how you have 48 Democratic votes right now. The other two have been pressured over the weekend by activists. Joe Manchin had people on kayaks show up to his boat to yell at him. Senator Sinema last night was chased into a restroom. Do you think that those tactics are crossing a line?
I don't think they're appropriate tactics, but it happens to everybody. From the only people it doesn't happen to are people who have Secret Service standing around them. It's part of the process. Yes, sir.
Just really quickly, a lot of people have been trying to attach immigration.
Mr. President, I know you don't want to comment on other senators' positions in the negotiations, but what do you think the size of the reconciliation package should be? What specific dollar figure?
Well, I laid out what I thought it should be. It's not going to be that. It's going to be less. I mean, look, the legislation, both the Build Back Better piece as well as the infrastructure piece, are things that I wrote. These didn't come from, God love him, Bernie Sanders or AOC or anybody else. I wrote them. I disagreed with Medicare for All, for example. I disagreed, but I laid out what I thought would be important. For example, I think in the Build Back Better program, it's required that we, in fact, have the best education available to us. And I'll be speaking to this in detail tomorrow. But look, here's the situation. How can we, in an ever-competitive world, increasingly competitive world, how can we not meet the educational standards of at least other countries are working toward? Nobody is reducing the number of years they want their children to go to school or people to go to school. You've heard me say it before, as my wife says. If any country out-educates us, they're going to outcompete us. Look what China's doing. Look what the rest of the world is doing. They're investing. They're also investing in things that relate to ability for people to go to work and stay at work. We have several million women who can't go back to work because they don't have any way to take care of their children. So to give a tax cut to a working mom to be able to afford daycare, is that bad? Is that a bad idea? I think it's a darn good idea. We'll get people back to work. So there's a lot of things in the legislation I'm going to be talking about across the country that I think the American people overwhelmingly support. But the idea that somehow this is somebody else's legislation, this is what I wrote.
Sir,
you accept a $2 trillion, say a $2 trillion reconciliation bill, would that be acceptable to you?
Again, as you know, it's not a smart thing to negotiate with yourself in public. Let's see, we're in the process of continuing to talk to all the parties and see what we can get done.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. Two questions. First, you said there was progress in the negotiation, but today you said you only have 48 votes. So what is this progress? And another question on the foreign, an international news that was big yesterday about the Pandora Papers. Do you have any reaction? You put fight against corruption as the core.
I'm sorry, I didn't get the last
Pandora Papers, the Pandora Papers. You said that you put fight against corruption in the core of your national security policy. So what is your reaction, and do you plan to do anything about it?
We're looking at that right now. The first part of your question was what?
Was about progress. What does progress look like for you in the negotiations?
Winning. That's the progress. Last question.
The height amendment? I just want to be very clear. Can you guarantee that the U.S. will not breach the debt ceiling, that will not happen?
No, I can't. That's up to Mitch McConnell.
So it is possible that the U.S. will not pay its debts. That is possible.
I can't believe that will be the end result because the consequence is so dire. I don't believe that. But can I guarantee it? If I could, I would, but I can't. Thank you all very much. Appreciate it.
Senator Manchin says the deal is off if the Hyde Amendment is not included. Do you support that? Where do you stand on that, sir?
All right. The President of the United States there taking some questions after delivering a series of remarks about the debt ceiling limit. President saying, likening it to playing Russian roulette. Let's bring back our Ed O'Keefe for some analysis of what the President just said. Is Ed ready to? Yeah, there he is. So, Ed, I thought it was really an interesting, short but interesting series of observations that the President delivered. What was your biggest takeaway?
That he's trying to get Republicans to allow this debt limit vote to occur without the threat of a filibuster. That's, if you're cutting through the morass there, that's essentially what he's trying to say to the Republicans. Back off. Let us do this with a simple majority vote if you insist on not supporting our ability to do this with majority rule in the Senate. There was a letter transmitted to him today by the Senate Minority Leader essentially saying, look, your party has been being a little too cavalier with the economy right now and should be buckling down to try to get this done. So the president's turning around saying, look, I'll try to talk to them about this, but what I'd like them to do is just allow us to have a simple majority vote, up or down. Do we raise the debt limit? For how long and to how much? And that is essentially going to be issue number one this week here in Washington. It is such a technical thing. It is such a housekeeping thing that should be able to be done very easily. But for months, Republicans in the Senate have been saying, you can go ahead and do this, Democrats, but you're going to do it without our support, because we believe that if you're going to have one-party rule and try to ram through all the other things you're doing right now, the bipartisan infrastructure bill, the partisan Build Back Better agenda, and you're going to have to raise the debt limit on your own. Democrats turn around, as the president, you heard him there say, this is to pay for things that have already been approved in the past. It's a credit card bill, in essence. And you need to work with us to do this or get out of our way and let Democrats do it on their own. That's the essential message he's trying to issue here. It's one of the first times he's spoken about raising the debt limit in recent weeks in a more formal presidential setting, which is to signal that the White House understands this needs to be done. And it comes as the Majority Leader, Chuck Schumer, this morning told his colleagues that they may have to stay through the weekend to get this done. He wants it done this week, not bleeding into October 18th next week and beyond, because then you could be disrupting the markets, and Democrats need that floor time in the House and the Senate to get those other things done that we've spent so much time talking about in recent days.
So why don't the Democrats just raise the debt ceiling on their own then? If
They'd
they
like
have the ability to.
They'd like to, but they keep getting blocked, and they have to throw up a cloture vote, and they have to hit that 60-vote threshold, filibuster. So that's what he's trying to say to them is, we can do this. If you insist on not helping us out, fine. But tell all your Republican members not to threaten us with a filibuster when we go to do it. Stand back and let us, as he said there, stand back and let us save the country, whatever. In essence, he's saying, if you don't want to play, fine. Let us do it with a simple up or down vote that puts you guys on the record as being against it and puts us on the record being for it. What McConnell is suggesting is that you can use that complicated reconciliation process that we've spent way too much time trying to explain to people, because even we don't entirely understand it, which would allow them to do it just with Democratic votes in a simple way, sort of with suspending the other rules. But as you heard the president say there, it's complicated, it could take a while, and the hodgepodging back and forth between the House and the Senate could really disrupt things even more. So we'll see. They got to work this out in the coming days. The president, the majority leader, signaling they'd like to get it done this week. And one way to do that is to put public pressure on Republicans to say, get out of our way, let us do it, and let's move on.
And finally, the president unwilling to negotiate in public, as he put it, with reporters asking him about the price tag. But he was also asked about folks who had followed Senator Sinema into the ladies' room, protesting, people who had appeared, I guess, in and around Joe Manchin's houseboat. He actually did take some questions, answer some questions. President called it inappropriate, but he also said this is sort of what happens if you are a politician, if you're a legislator, and people have access to you unless you have the Secret Service. It's not really easy to get away from folks who want something to say.
Right, and we've seen Democrats and Republicans in recent years face angry constituents in all sorts of ways, whether it's at a town hall meeting, whether it's Mitt Romney at the Salt Lake City airport coming back to Washington to approve the Electoral College results, whether it's Kyrsten Sinema over the weekend confronted by immigration activists. They were primarily concerned about the fact that she doesn't support doing immigration reform legislation or policy changes inside this massive bill, and the fact that, as the president pointed out, there's just two senators holding up this debate, her and Joe Manchin. Both of them have been confronted in creative ways by activists in recent days. We highlighted it in our reporting. We should point out that Kyrsten Sinema pointed out in a statement just a little while ago, they disrupted a class she was teaching at Arizona State University, where she's been teaching for several years. She said, in part, yesterday's behavior was not legitimate protest. It is unacceptable for activist organizations to instruct their members to jeopardize themselves by engaging in unlawful activities such as gaining entry to closed university buildings, disrupting learning environments, and filming students in a restroom. They did follow her in, and then they followed her out. She went back to the classroom. These activists say she or her office hasn't been taking meetings with them. It is a kind of sort of liberal backlash she's going to face heading towards her 2024 re-election cycle, which is a while away, so she's got time. But it's an example of the pent-up frustration she's facing, that Manchin's facing, and that other lawmakers face for all sorts of reasons. Of course, in this day and age, when there are a record number of threats against policymakers, we don't necessarily want to see or amplify that, because you never know what could happen. And to the president's point, someone like him who has Secret Service protections held at a farther remove from people like that. But I think what he was also saying is, look, this is the anger that people in our party feel, and it's time for you guys to cut a deal with us and get this done.
All right, Ed O'Keefe, thanks so much.
Take care.
Developing story for you now. The Ambassador Bridge that connects Michigan and Canada has been evacuated as police investigate possible explosives found in the area. Windsor officers on the Canadian side are urging people to avoid the area while they work to determine the credibility of the threat. Traffic is currently shut down in both directions. Meanwhile, Michigan police are warning of backed up traffic.
Some other news that we're following, Anne Marie, if you or members